My name is Owen Lee. I also go by the artist name O'Sound. I'm an artist, musician, songwriter, musical professional. I serve in numerous different capacities here in Nova Scotia. I am currently the program coordinator for the African Nova Scotian Music Association. I'm the musical director of Emmanuel Baptist Church in Upper Hammonds Plains, Nova Scotia. I'm the former director of the Nova Scotia Mass Choir, where I served for a few years. But for today, I am the creator and writer of Listen. I'm what you call a first-generation Canadian. I was born and raised in Toronto, but my parents came to Canada in the 80s, both of them reigning from Jamaica. So my experience being a first-generation Canadian was very unique. Growing up in a home that is Jamaican, so the customs, the rituals, the food, the language, but then leaving that home and going to a school that's Canadian, Eurocentric learning. So it was a very interesting experience growing up as a first-generation Canadian that identifies with the roots of my parents while living in a completely separate country. Growing up in Toronto was a very unique experience, but I didn't acknowledge or realize how unique it was to grow up in Toronto until I left and started to experience life in different cities. Toronto is one of the most multicultural, diverse cities in the world. So growing up, you're used to living in a home where your culture is one thing, but once you leave, the culture is completely different outside of your home base. The language I speak, the food I ate, the customs and rituals and morals that I learned. But then I go to school and the people I see in the textbooks are completely different. The lessons that I'm learning are completely different. The standards and practices are completely different. So it was this duality of feeling like I'm more connected to my Jamaican roots, but my citizenship says Canada. My learning is Canada. The language and the way that I sound is reflective of being a Canadian from Toronto, and even the vibe of the city. A lot of my friends growing up were first generation Canadians, whether it be from Italy or Greece or Ghana, like people that came from all over the world. So no matter where you are in the city, the vibe changes because as people came in, they kind of set up mini homes throughout the city. If you want the Greek culture, you're gonna go to the Danforth. If you want Jamaican culture, you're gonna hit up Eglinton Avenue West. If you want Italian culture, you're probably gonna go to Woodbridge. So we all kind of had our stomping ground or a place where we knew we could thrive within our community, where we could feel at home, where we knew we could find our food, our native tongue, our colloquialisms. So that was an experience that I didn't realize was so unique to the city of Toronto until I left it. So when it comes down to the topic of racism, my experience with racism in Toronto is completely different than what I experience here on the East Coast. Again, Toronto being as multicultural as it is, there's definitely a ton of prejudice that you find as you navigate throughout the city. I remember the first time I was called the N-word was when I was 7 years old. And it was by another kid my age who was a Jewish child. And I didn't even know what the word meant. If it wasn't for another friend of mine who knew, I would have just walked away like, whatever. But it caused me to stop and think years later, how does a 7-year-old know what the N-word is? And in what context is it being used in their own home? And how did they know how to accurately use it towards me? Right? I remember walking into convenience stores as a child with money and the intent to buy, but being kicked out because I looked suspicious or I looked like I was up to no good. Street checks constantly, driving through the neighborhood on my bike, probably going to play ball and stopping to pump gas and being swarmed by police officers asking where I'm going to or where I'm coming from, or I fit the description of, someone in the area who did some crime. So these were experiences that were very overt and like it's in your face and you see it, so you know not to frequent this area or you stay away from these people or you navigate a certain way. But when I moved here to Nova Scotia, it's so different. It's such a juxtaposition, a duality, because the culture of the East Coast is people are so friendly. They're so cordial. Everyone says hi to you as you're walking on the street. They'll invite you over for a drink or for dinner. People are just so kind, but below it, there's this very covert prejudice that still exists within families and communities where I'm cool with you as long as you don't buy a house in my area. You know, I'm cool with you working at my workplace as long as you don't have a position of leadership or you don't sit on a board. I'm cool with you coming to my house and playing with my kids, but just don't fall in love and marry one of them. You know, like it's this duality of, yeah, we're all friendly, but below it all, we still understand exactly what the vibe is. And to further prove that, you look at the geography of the city, and all of the prominent Black communities are located geographically kilometers outside of the Halifax core. Like, you may come into Halifax to go to work or to handle your business, but once the day's done, you're traveling 20 minutes outside of the city to your humble abode, which stems back to the Black history here on Nova Scotian soil, the early settlers, the Maroons, or the Black loyalists, or just the free slaves who came, and the land that they were given was bad land in the outskirts, because the intent was, we don't expect they'll be able to survive this. But here they are years later, and well, centuries later, and now it's no longer a matter of we didn't expect them to survive. It's a matter of, well, now that they did survive, how do we coexist without them getting in our space? And you feel that in equity, diversity, and inclusion policies. You feel that when you walk into certain establishments and there's a level of attention. You feel that when you look at the statistics that come out, and it shows you that even though African Nova Scotians only account for 5% of Nova Scotia's population, they're 6 times more likely to be street checked by RCMP and police officers. So this just goes to further prove that even on the surface, although people are overtly friendly, there's still a very deep, potent underlying sense of systemic oppression that is still prevalent here in the East Coast. One thing that I can relate to coming from Toronto is, even though the experience of racism is different, the feeling is still the same. You know, the feeling of you don't belong here, of knowing what your culture is, knowing what your identity is, but feeling like you have to mask that or doll it up when you enter into certain facilities. You know, it's kind of the reason why I'm growing my hair right now, because, you know, I'm tired of being deemed unprofessional because of my skin color. I'm tired of the texture of my hair being deemed unprofessional. It's the way it grows out of my head. How could it be anything? It's just hair. Right? I can't help how my hair grows, but the fact that you can enter into a space where they'll tell you you can't wear your hair a certain way, or else you can't be here, or you have to dress a certain way, or you have to speak a certain way. You know, here in the Black community, we're so used to code switching, where I'll speak to my friends in one manner, my parents in another manner, but when I get into the workplace, I have to do my best to mask or dull of my ethnic identity, because I don't want to be offensive to anybody, or I don't want to be misunderstood. So that's an experience that I don't think is unique to the East Coast. It's actually throughout Canada. You know, I'm looking at Black history and wondering why, when we go to school, we learn about Samuel de Champlain, we learn about prime ministers and European and French settlers, Matthew de Costa. What about Richard Preston? What about Marcus Garvey, who delivered a notable speech in Whitney Pier that was then used to write Redemption Song? What about these things that happened on Canadian soil? What about the Black loyalists who fled the War of 1812 and settled here in Nova Scotia? What about these things? I didn't learn about any of this until my early adult ages, where I had to fish for the information myself. They didn't teach me this in school. So years ago, when I was still conducting the mass choir, we were invited to sing for the opening of the Black Loyalist Center that opened on the South Shore of Nova Scotia. And it was decided that we were gonna sing the song Glory by Common and John Legend. When we were learning the song, you know, Common he wrote his verses specifically to speak about Selma. But I was kind of conflicted, because I said, am I really gonna go to the Black Loyalist Center opening and rap a verse about Selma? You know, like, there's already enough history that happens here. So I challenged myself. I said, I'm gonna write a verse of my own rather than deliver this verse that's not mine. So when we performed Glory, we still sung the chorus as is, you know, one day when the glory comes. But instead of spitting Common's verse, I wrote my own. And I wrote, I stand tall, my head facing the steeple, fighting tears thinking about the struggle of my people, and continued to speak about the Maroons, the Black loyalists. And after we performed that song, the reception I received was, you can't just let that verse die. It can't just be a one-time thing where we did this for the Black Loyalist opening and now the verse is no more. So I challenged myself. I said, you know what? I'm gonna write a song of my own. So I took the inspiration from Common's Glory, but I sat down and I began to formulate my own chords. I began to formulate my own drum patterns. And once I finally got the instrumental portion down, I just started to sit down and think about my Black experience living in Canada. And as I thought about it, the words just began to come, same struggle, just a different day. Still requesting an ID when I gotta pay. Still use different civics on the resume because we know that community names make them look away, which is a very real experience even here in Nova Scotian soil. You have a lot of African Nova Scotians who are still lying about their names and their addresses because they know that their probability of being hired will decrease if it's known that they're from North Preston or Upper Hammonds Plains or any of the Black communities. They may get their mail sent to a relative's house who lives in town because it's more suitable to hire people from certain areas, right? So these are real experiences that even though formal slavery was abolished, we still live this till this very day. There was a point in history where they were selling Black slaves on Scotian soil, auctioning them off. But even though that doesn't happen, the hate and disdain for the communities is still very alive. And we see it when we try to work for certain environments or certain establishments and there's a clear indication that we don't belong. We see it when you try to apply to live in certain areas and there's pushback. You see it when you look at certain public services that still aren't offered to the communities that are outside of the HRM, the Black communities essentially. So yeah, I tapped into all these experiences and I decided I'm gonna write my own song. And as I started writing, I was thinking like, what am I gonna name this song? Like there's so much content in here, but I realized that the easiest thing to say is just, y'all need to listen. Just listen. Why then has all of this happened to us? So when I released Listen, I didn't know how it was gonna be received. I knew I just wanted to be honest about my experience as a first generation Canadian, but also shed light on the experience of African Nova Scotians who have been on Canadian soil for centuries, but still feel the byproducts of systemic oppression that's alive to this day. And I was met with a lot of backlash, but also a lot of support, more than I anticipated. I ended up being one of the talking points for the Halifax Regional School Board. They had a professional development day where it was centered around my song, and I ended up receiving a lot of response from teachers all throughout the HRM. I've had the pleasure of performing this song on different stages throughout Canada, and a lot of times I was met with love and appreciation, but then there also were times where I was met with defense. A few times I stood on the stage rapping the verse and watching people get up and walk out of the theater or watching people get up and leave the festival. So there's definitely still work to be done, but I'm excited for the conversation that's being bred from this song that I released. And I'm still hopeful for our tomorrow. I want my children to be able to live in a better world than I did. I don't want them to have the same experiences that I did growing up. I don't want them to have the same run-in with police officers or walk into a store with the innocent intention to buy candy and being told, you look suspicious, you gotta get out of here. I just don't wanna see that future for my children. So if we're gonna create change, then we gotta start being vocal about it. Same struggle, just a different day. Still requesting an ID when I gotta pay. Still use different civics on the resume because we know that community names make them look away. I pray to God someone listens. We don't play no race cards, dog. It's the life that we're living. Casual police checks, we all fit the description. Minorities in the street, so how we rule in the prison? I don't get it. Black skin and brown eyes got me stigmatized. The media don't televise lest somebody dies. They feeding us premium lies by the supersize. That's how we grow desensitized to our mother's cry. It happens way too often. Front row up in the church, sun up in the coffin. Heads up, God, we suffer too many losses. More rallies, more riots, more city marches. And that cop that took his life, you know they dropped the charges. Chalked it up to ghetto thug, just another target. Man, this cycle keeps repeating and I'm getting nauseous. Got me praying for my sons, we gotta be cautious. I wanna be off this, but there's no ways out. We came a long way, but still a long ways out. I've been praying for change, but I'm all prayed out. Got my fist up in the sky, cause I want change now. I stand tall, my head facing the steeple. Fighting tears, thinking about the struggle of my people. Generations of forefathers looking for a breakthrough with nothing left but God and faith to hold on to, Robbed of freedom, stripped of pride. Some holding on to life and others living to die. They gave us little to nothing, but we took it in stride. Turned nothing into something, found the strength to survive. Turned survival into triumph, through the ashes we rise. Yeah, we found strength that we had embedded inside. Underneath the melanin lies rejection and pain. But don't forget about the history that flows through our veins. Stories of what was, what is to come. Redemption for black fathers, freedom for black sons, maroons, black loyalist slaves. They all won through the successes, the sons we fighting to overcome. Listen, bumping Sam Cooke up in the subwoofer. Now is not the time to be an onlooker. If my people unified and will begin to mobilize, and they go see the heat rising like a slow cooker. And there's no days out. We came a long way, but still a long ways out. I've been praying for change, but I'm all prayed out. Got my fist up in the sky, cause I want change now.